Tom, and thank you for joining us today.
Hey.
I'm always really excited to hear people with such a varied career in theatre, such as yourself. Could you tell us a little bit about how you got into theatre in the first place?
Sure. Yeah. So I grew up in Coventry, which is in the Midlands, for those who don't know. And the very first entry point was that a random dance teacher came to my primary school and insisted that everyone took part in a dance class. If I remember correctly, it was S Club 7. And we had to do some sort of choreography to it. And I absolutely loved it, loved performing, loved doing all of that. And so I was desperately trying to find, I think my mum was trying to find a dance class for me to join. However, I ended up joining a youth theatre instead. Now, looking back, I think it was probably some internal homophobia. I mean, I'm gay now, so I've overcome it. But at the time, I was like, oh, I don't know if I could do dance class. And I did end up loving dance. But so it's through this dance class, I ended up thinking, okay, theatre maybe is a bit more masculine. Maybe it's a bit more something that I wouldn't, get the mick taken out of me quite as much. And I joined a youth theatre at the Belgrade Theatre, which is still going very strong in Coventry, just taken over by a new leadership team. So joined the youth theatre there and did that for many years growing up and just loved it. Found a real friendship group, family, and just developed that passion. And at the time, the thing with youth theatre at the Belgrade was all about, which many places do now, is like we devised all the shows as a group of young people, and we devised these shows about things that really mattered to us and things that were really important, often political stuff or socio-political stuff. So I really think that's where I found that bite and that part of what I love about theatre now was there all the way back then.
Yeah, that's amazing, really. It's interesting because some of the conversations that we've had with other people throughout this series as well, it always kind of started maybe at school or, it goes quite far back, which is amazing. And actually, it was the same for me as well. I'm from Wolverhampton, so.
Oh, nice.
And I did a kind of similar thing at the Birmingham Rep, so it does
kind of just down the road.
Yeah, exactly. So it definitely sparks an interest, doesn't it?
And the Belgrade is legendary for its young people's work and still is, but historically its theatre education, young people's projects were massive. It really was a game changer in those regards. So when I was there was a real energy and all sorts of young people doing all sorts of things. It was really inspiring.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's so important, isn't it, to kind of support young people, I think, getting into theatre in that way. And so what did you do after that then? So what happened next?
Well, I think many people start off with, so I knew I wanted to work in theatre, but I had no idea what the roles are, what the jobs are really. And the only or the most visible role, of course, was acting. So even though in these shows in the youth theatre I was devising, we were writing, we were directing and performing them, I sort of had it in my head that performing was the thing to do. Now, no one in my family worked in theatre. I had no one really to advise me on how that was supposed to happen. So I set out to go to university, weirdly to study psychology, which is also something I'm very interested in, and thought that I would do drama societies and things like that. Now, it was at the Belgrade when I was working on a show when the director said, "So what are you going to do next, Tom?" And I was like, "Oh, I'm going to study psychology and do theatre on the side." He was like, "But what do you want to do?" I was like, "Well, I want to be an actor." He's like, "Okay, there's other options that maybe will be more direct to what you want to do." So he told me about this magical thing called drama school, which I knew nothing about and didn't know anyone who went, didn't even know that it existed, and helped me learn more about schools and eventually prepare auditions. So it took me a couple of years to get in, but I did go to drama school eventually to train as an actor, and worked as an actor for a few years after graduating. So that was my first entry into professional theatre making. But all the while I was writing and hadn't quite realised that was more the area that I wanted to work in. I mean, at drama school, I was writing things for my friends to perform. Whenever there was an opportunity to write a scene rather than do something that was published, I was always taking that opportunity. And then when I was lucky enough to work as an actor, I was writing in the day and getting friends to perform them and the cast that I was working with. So it took a while for me to really connect the two things that I liked, which is writing and theatre. But once I had, it all just made sense. So there was another pivot then a few years into acting where I decided to commit properly to to writing and also directing. So I gave up acting, I let go of my agent, and really decided to dedicate myself to writing and directing. At which point the literary stuff sort of started to come in. So shall I keep going? This is a long timeline, isn't it?
Yeah, keep going.
It's a whole life. I decided to do that, but obviously I needed to earn money still, as everyone does. And when you're first starting out as an artist, it's very difficult to make ends meet. So I was doing, as I was when I was an actor and not working, I was doing every job you can imagine in London. I think I've literally done everything. And I've got lots of funny stories about the more slightly depressing or hilarious jobs that I did. But I really wanted at that point to earn all my money from theatre somehow. So I was doing a lot of facilitation, which I think is an amazing thing that a lot of artists can do now, and often is actually the most lucrative part of an artist's practice, like facilitating workshops, teaching, working with young people or communities is a great way to make money when maybe your primary art practice isn't necessarily making it. So I did a lot of that. And through that ended up getting a placement, actually the same placement that Becky from the RSC did, who I know you spoke to, at the Old Vic. So they did this amazing placement where you worked for Old Vic New Voices and you worked on all of their young people, community and artist projects. So I did it literally just after Becky. And that was amazing because I got to work on all of these different aspects. And but was really drawn to the artist development strand, much like Becky was, because I was a working artist as well. The placement was part-time. I felt like I knew what artists needed or wanted, as well as gradually learning the skills of how to offer it them from within an organization. So that's sort of where this dual career started for me, of like working inside organizations part-time, and then also working as an artist outside organizations. And so from there, I ran the Old Vic 12, got the baton from Becky, and ran that for 5 years, which I know we'll talk about a little bit more. And then from there, moved to this role that I'm in now, which is the new work associate at the Kiln. I'm still part-time, so I still write, I still direct. And the way I think about that practice now, to finish off the life story, is for me, it's all the same thing. So I'm like really passionate about new writing. That's what I love doing. And whether that's me working as a writer, which in some way is me, the sort of purest way I can say what it is I need to say about the world, and be an artist and communicate and learn more about the things I'm passionate about. That's sort of one way of doing it. Whether I'm directing or dramaturging other people's work is like the next sphere. That's about helping someone else say what it is they want to say about the world. And then the third sphere is jobs like this in an organization, leadership roles, literary roles, or artist development roles that I've done. And that's sort of about how can I change the sector so that as many people as possible can say what it is they want to say about the world. So it's taken a while for me to realize that's what I'm doing, and that actually these three spheres are all the same skills used in slightly different ways. Of course, when you're in a room as the dramaturg, you're not going to be a writer in the room, because that would be frustrating for everyone, or you're not going to be. So you call on different elements of those skills when necessary. But for me, they are all connected.
Yeah.
So there you go. That's me in a nutshell.
Yeah, no, and that, it's so interesting to hear how you kind of came to that, and how the different strands of your work kind of feed into each other, and how they're not separate. Because I think that's why these conversations are really important, because when we think about people who work in a literary department, as a new work associate or a literary manager or something like that, I think quite often we imagine this person behind a desk, and I've said this before, with piles of scripts and, that particular role. But what we don't always know about, because we haven't had these conversations, is that actually these are the people behind the roles who are really passionate about new writing. And, they do, other strands of work as well that all kind of weave together. So it's really interesting to hear that. And so what about your work at the Kiln then? So you are the new work associate there, aren't you? So what does that involve?
Essentially my job is to manage and support Indu, who's artistic director, in the development and delivery of all the new work that happens here at the theatre. And pretty much everything we do is new work. So there's a lot of it. I think in the time that I've been here, maybe there was one piece that was not a new play. And of course, there's a couple of new plays that came through other development processes, and we came in a bit later. And then there's lots of stuff we've developed entirely ourselves. So what that means practically is everything from the beginning of the pipeline. So seeing work, reading work, trying to identify writers and researching themes and ideas of things we want to talk about here at Kiln, to commissioning the writers, to working with them throughout the drafting process, which often takes a very long time, supporting them, giving notes to each draft and working with them in whatever way to keep them writing. To all the way then, hopefully when the piece is a bit more formed, to delivering table readings, to push the play forward, R&Ds, development processes, to then supporting Indu with creative team choices, getting the right team together around that piece of work, programming, to then when the show's actually happening, being a dramaturg in the room through rehearsals, supporting that process still because the play's never finished, all the way through previews and then performances, by which point you're really embedded in the team. So, it's about supporting everyone else to do their job to deliver this play that you've been with for years in the best possible way. Really from the whole breadth of the process. Indu, artistic director, is a very talented, not only a very talented director, but also a very talented dramaturg and experienced developer of new work. So she's also very hands-on in this process, and we work very closely as a team. And then, of course, there are times where, she's directing or very busy, in which case I have to sort of run with it slightly more. But she is very hands-on, which is brilliant. So, yeah, and outside of that, then it's about really trying to be an advocate for the playwright at the theatre and develop. As I've talked about, my background was in artist development, so that's always going to be a passion of what I do. So slowly but surely building up an artist development offering here at Kiln for all artists, but specifically writers, and being a sort of point of contact and an advocate for writers in the building. That's sort of a breadth of the thing. And I think what's interesting about the Kiln compared to other theatres is that we have quite a big artistic team. All of us are also working artists, and we're all part-time at the Kiln. So you've got an associate director, Amit Sharma, you've got myself, there's an associate designer, an associate assistant designer, associate playwright, associate resident assistant director. So there's a real hub of working artists in the building, and we all go away and do other projects and come back. So I think that's, other theatres do that in different ways, but I think that's quite unique here, especially in my role, to have the freedom to also have my own practice as well as doing everything here. And for artists who work here, they get to connect with that group of core artists in the building who know the building very well and the aesthetic and the politics that we're going after here, and can support them in the right way. It's certainly exciting for me to work in that environment.
Yeah, I think that sounds amazing. And especially, I guess as a group of people there as well, you're doing your own creative work. You're actually in that world, and you're going out and making your own work as well. I imagine that sort of strengthens the kind of support you can give to the artists you're working with as well at the Kiln.
I think so. I believe in that, but I would, because that's the setup I want. But I genuinely believe that, being an artist, as many people are, means that you understand better how to support artists. And obviously, having been through the vulnerable process of being a playwright where your play is produced, you're going to understand at each step of the way what those artists are feeling. Now, every artist is different. It doesn't mean it you know everything at all, but it does help.
Yeah, I can imagine that definitely helps. And so, how do you find new writers at the Kiln? Do people submit plays to you, or do you find them another way?
So we currently don't read unsolicited scripts. Yeah. There's lots of reasons for that. But what we are dedicated to trying to do at the moment is build a real roots in and roots through the organization as a writer, and trying to have an offering to writers at every stage of their career. Obviously, that's quite a bold aim. It's going to take us a while to build that up, because every new project requires funding and staffing and all of this, but slowly we're piecing it together. So some of the things we do at the moment is I run a scheme called the Listen Local Young Writer Scheme, which offers 10 young people from Brent, which is our local area, which is our borough, the paid opportunity to learn how to write a play for the very first time. So that's for writers with literally no experience whatsoever, have never written anything. And by the end of the course, they will have not only written a short play, but they are then produced on our main stage, well, our only stage. So that's an incredible project. We're going into the third year of that. And through that, we've identified some really exciting people who have gone from never writing before to going on to do other courses, Soho Young Writers and Royal Court Writers Groups, and dedicating themselves to playwriting, having never considered it before. So that's our real entry level scheme. Yeah. From there, we also have launched something called the monthly masterclasses. So every month we are dedicated to delivering at least one free masterclass or workshop to writers of any age or any experience level. And that's more a place where writers who have started writing, who are exploring their craft, can drop into the kiln. By giving their time, all these workshops are free. They, in return, they hopefully improve their skills. And it's also a way for us to really start connecting to writers in a practical way. Again, that's for Brent-based or NW-based artists. I mean, so we say live, learn or earn. So you have to work, live or study in Brent to participate. And from there, we also then can identify writers, local writers who perhaps have written scripts that we might want to read, that we wouldn't read, that we wouldn't necessarily solicit in any other way. We're working on more steps of this sort of ladder. So we have a seed commission scheme, which is about commissioning writers that we meet through these processes, and others that we might not be ready to commit to a full commission for the main stage, because everything we commission, we're desperately trying to make sure actually happens. But does give them a way to start exploring a play idea for us in a paid, supported way that we can then consider for full commission. And then eventually we also obviously give full commissions out to writers for our main program. So you can see how we're trying to have a step for each point, so we can guide writers through and engage with them in different ways. And we're still thinking of ideas to fill the gaps between those steps. You'll notice a lot of it is for Brent and NW artists, and we feel that's really important because we are in Brent. It's one of the least funded areas in London. In other boroughs, there are loads of theatres that run loads of schemes, and there's loads of theatres that run schemes for all Londoners. So we do have a bit of a dedication to Brent artists, just because they're really under-resourced and under-supported.
Yeah, which is really important, isn't it? I think to support the local community in that way, especially Definitely. You know, as it is underfunded, and to have those kind of just the entry level, you know, opportunities there that you don't always get. You know, it's difficult but it's difficult, isn't it? There's not loads of stuff out there, so I think that's really important. And then it sounds as though, you know, you've got so many things along the process as well, so because it's a long process, isn't it, from writing that first play or getting into theatre in the first place to having a play commissioned on a main stage somewhere.
So long. And obviously the odd person, it's not that long, and we all hope that that's going to be us, but for the majority of people it takes a very long time for the iceberg that's huge and worked on for years to finally sort of peak a little bit over the top. I mean, the way I see artist development is, you know, no one theatre can offer everything, although that's our aim. But if theatres talk, which we do, and connect and think about how their schemes fill different gaps, then I guess the ideal is that an artist can move through different organisations and take advantage of different schemes at different point in their career, and that there is someone that will hold their hand at each stage. So we're doing as much as we can to offer a sort of offering to that ecosystem. But equally, there's loads of other theatres that do other things. So as writers, I guess we have to spend some time really trying to understand the ecosystem and be really honest about where we are, what stage we are, and who's best to support us at that point. I'm not saying within the ecosystem at the moment there's something for everyone. There isn't necessarily, but that's very much the aim.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it is, I mean, it's tricky, isn't it? You know, as a new writer, I mean, again, that's one of the reasons why we started London Playwrights all those years ago, because, you know, I came out of uni and been writing, and it was kind of like, okay, what now? So, you know, I've got a play, but where do I send it? And it just seemed like such a long way off, you know, to send it somewhere and for that to be commissioned. And okay, there you go, it's on stage. So I think to have these different schemes and different ways to support writers along the way, that's really fantastic. And, you know, the other thing that comes up in these conversations, which is really interesting, I think, is that the process is so long. And we do kind of hear a lot, you know, about this idea of someone just writing something and becoming, you know, so successful overnight. But actually, there's so many steps involved in that. And it might feel that way when you go to the theatre and you see work by a new writer, because they're called a new writer. It might be their debut play, but it might actually be their 50th play, but it's the first one that's been produced. So I think it's
absolutely, and that's it's good to remember that that's the exception and not the rule, and that most people are working for so long. And that's certainly the truth about myself. You know, I'd done all these schemes, done all these different things, and written plays for a long time. I think I'd written my third or fourth play by the time finally the first one was properly produced. And I remember having the feeling, because I worked in arts development, I had the feeling that you just outlined. I remember really adamantly being like, right, in my biography or whatever, in the first play text, I mean, it could just say this is Tom's debut play, but I was like, no, I really want to be transparent about everything that it's taken to get to the debut play. So it's kind of embarrassing now in hindsight. I don't know if it was the right thing, but that was my intention at the time, of listing, you know, all of I did this scheme and did this, and then this reading and this, because I wanted people, just like I did when I used to read the play text or do, and go, oh, how did that person get to that point? And then I'd just read debut play and I'd be like, oh, but I want to know how. So I decided to be really transparent about that. And actually people at the time, including, I think my agent at the time was like, please don't do that. Just say debut play. It looks more impressive. Like, you know, it will be taken in a different way if it looks like you've been working for a long time, which was very interesting to me. And, but yeah, I did do that, and so now it's there to see the long, jaggedy, wriggly path that it took to get that first play on.
Yeah, I mean, I personally think that's great, because I think, you know, if you're an emerging writer and you're sitting there and you're looking at that and you see, okay, debut play, that doesn't feel accessible, because it feels like, okay, but how? Okay, you've obviously, you know, just it sounds as if you've sent it off and it was kind of put on overnight. But to actually hear, you know, see how you got there, there's probably something that feels much more accessible along the way, that, you know, applying for one of these schemes or applying for some kind of development program. So I think it's good. I'm glad you put it in there. Even
if I cringe in like 10 years time, there was a good reason to do it at the time.
Yeah, absolutely. And so what does a normal day look like for you? It sounds like you have quite a lot going on.
I mean, at Kiln, the exciting thing is every day is different, and that's what I love. I mean, usually what's happening is there'll be a show in production, the show either in like tech rehearsals or actually being performed, at which case you're keeping an eye on that. You're reading show reports, you're occasionally attending shows, but also looking after the team, making sure everyone's happy. And I also run post-show Q&As and things like that with the plays that are in production. Meanwhile, then you've probably got another play in rehearsals, of which you're attending as much as you can. Still giving notes to the writer, supporting them through the process, as well as supporting the marketing team and how to talk about the play and all the other creatives. So that's going on. And then over here, you've also still got to keep all the plates spinning of all the plays that have been commissioned and are in development, which, you know, writers can deliver drafts at any point, and they want feedback and they want support in who to speak to or research and things like that. So there's always things going on in each, again, sort of like spheres of Kiln, I guess. But that's quite fun, and it means that you're always sort of speaking to these three companies. And outside of that, then there's all the artist development stuff that's usually going on. So, I mean, on a typical day, it could really differ. But what I tend to do is try and read at least a play in the morning, first thing, while my brain's fresh, and keep on top of reading. Then blast through some emails, and then get into working with those three in those three spheres. And yeah, that's what I like about theatre. I'm sure everyone agrees, is that it is always different, and you know, no day's the same. As an artist, anything you become fascinated by, you could sort of dedicate quite big periods of your life to explore through your work, and you become an expert in different things. And the lovely part of being a new work associate means that I get to work on all these plays that are about completely different things, and I get to become or attempt to become a temporary expert, or at least someone who knows a little bit about the areas. And that's just really fun, isn't it? I mean, what an amazing thing to be able to do.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And what about your own work then? How do you kind of squeeze that in around everything?
Yeah, it's a bit of a challenge. Uh, so I'm part-time at the Kiln. At the moment, I'm doing 4 days, but it does vary. So that means in a regular day at the moment, I get a day to do my own writing. Um, Sometimes I take that as 2 mornings. So that means I'm at the Kiln every day. And also I write better in the morning. So it means rather than trying to do a full day, which is just really hard work, and I don't think anyone actually does that. I don't know, maybe they do. I could do like 2 good mornings. So that keeps the writing going. It does mean that I have to be really disciplined to meet the deadlines for the various projects I'm working on. But also there's flexibility there. So when earlier in the year when I had productions of my work on, or I was making films, I needed to be away from the Kiln for longer, then I can work more at the Kiln to time away from the Kiln or take unpaid leave and things like that. So as long as the work at the Kiln is done and continues, which is, then there is a bit of flexibility to acknowledge that I'm also an artist and that at some points I'll have to go away and do projects, just like all of us do, including the associate director who's away at the moment. And then again, the benefit of having that team is there are other people that can support that process. I'm not the only person that holds those relationships. But what I will say to anyone who wants to juggle and do those things, it's totally doable, and what an exciting life. But you do have to work really hard because well, I remember someone giving me advice actually about, more and more artists are something slash something slash something, right? They do multiple things, which I think is brilliant. That's the way I live my life. And I really encourage people to not limit themselves. But the only finite resource you do have is time. And if you want to be amazing at all those things, you're going to have to work 3 times as hard if you've got 3 things you want to be good at. Do you know what I mean? Because if directors just want to be an amazing director, they can dedicate all their time to reading the books and doing the courses and gaining experience. If you want to be good at the writing and the directing, you're going to have to do 2 times of those opportunities. So you have to work harder, but then, as I said at the beginning, those things start to cross over, and all the work you do as a director makes you a better writer. The writer, so it starts to all round up.
Yeah.
But it's hard work, I guess, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, no, yeah, I can imagine that. And I mean, I bet you have to be quite disciplined when you've got, say a morning marked out to write, to kind of not bring with you all the other stuff that you've probably got going on. That must be quite tricky. Do you find you just
I think that's why I find writing in the morning is better, because I can just sort of think, I'll get to the Kiln stuff later. Hopefully no one's gonna die in the meantime, and I can just get through some writing while my head's clear, and then jump into the Kiln stuff. So that seems to have worked. But I mean, I've been working in this way for about 10 years now. I was at the Old Vic for a long time. Again, I was part-time running projects. So I've always had to divide my brain like that. So I haven't ever known the expanse of just being able to write all the time. And actually that idea sort of terrifies me. I mean, maybe I'd rise to it if it happens, but the idea of having all week to write, I'm like, what would I do? I think I'd go crazy.
Yeah, it's a strange thing, isn't it? Having that stretch of time. I remember what I used to work in a different sort of full-time job, and sometimes take like a week off to write, and then actually not get any writing done because you just got this kind of vast stretch of time ahead of you. But I think that's a good tip to say write in the mornings, because I think otherwise life just gets in the way, doesn't it? If you've got a to-do list, and sometimes the other to-do list is more kind of something you can tick off and just go through, whereas writing's a bit more open, isn't it? So
it took me a long time to realize that, longer than it probably should have. But even at the Old Vic, I think there was a point where I was working 3 days a week, so I had 2 whole days to write, and I was trying to do 2 whole days of writing, and I probably did that for about a year before I realized I was never doing anything after lunch, or everything after lunch was rubbish. So it's basically, I was end up going out and meeting friends in the afternoon, or doing some sort of research thing. And I was like, it took a while to actually acknowledge that was my process, I guess. And then I think I quickly switched to, rather than taking 2 whole days, I just had every morning off, which amounts, or 4 mornings, sorry, that amounts to the 2 days. And then my employer liked it because I was in every day at some point. So they were never had to wait too long before they could speak to me again. But also meant that I was only writing at the time where I was able to write, if that makes sense. So I
Yeah.
think it's good for writers to be really honest about how they do work, not to get too romanticized about it and be like, I can only work if I have the right cappuccino in the exact spot, because, you know, ultimately at some point you ain't going to have those things and that's going
Yeah.
to become a bit difficult. But equally allow themselves to work in the best way possible.
Yeah, I think that's really, really good advice, because there's that thing, isn't it, that we, a lot of the time kind of get up in the morning and go to the admin kind of base stuff first, because it's quick to kind of, and that's just probably wasting. If you know you're most creative in the morning, you better off kind of, harnessing that, I guess, and writing when you're feeling fresh and creative. But what about your work? So your work kind of, all the work you've got going on in the kind of literary setting, how does that kind of feed into your writing as well? Do you ever you ever supporting a writer and you have like a light bulb moment and think that feeds into my creative work?
Definitely, yeah. I mean, I just think it's the same skills used in different ways. You know, when I'm working with writers, of course, I'm sharing. Um, well, there's a balance. I'm making it all about them. I'm ensuring it's about their process and the play they want to write. But of course, my own experience is informing that in different ways. And as I say, no writers are exactly like me. I'm not trying to force them to work in the way that I work. And I'm always trying to learn as many different practices. So I have this array of tools that I can then offer to a writer, even if some of them aren't useful for me, they might be useful to them. But absolutely, when I work with writers, I'm always inspired by the amazing writers I get to work with here, and that makes me want to work harder or apply something to my own writing. And yeah, I do think in most processes at the Kiln, there comes a point where I can really empathize with a challenge the writers had because I've been through something similar.
Yeah.
And, you know, that's a real connecting moment if you're able to be honest about that without making it all about you, you know, just being like, I really get where you are. Here's some things that might help me, or even just saying, I really understand, God, it's really hard, isn't it? And them knowing that, you know, yeah, it's that thing. I think if everyone thinks like, if everyone's got a group of writer friends or even a writer friend, and you meet up and you just sort of know exactly what each other are going through and you can sort of bond. I think it allows me to have that sort of relationship with writers, which is just slightly different from the idea of being someone removed and not quite having ever experienced that. I'm not saying those people can't be amazing at their jobs. They absolutely can, and they've probably got other strengths that I don't. But that's how I work. And yeah, it all informs.
Yeah, it all sort of ties in. So, would you have any advice for aspiring writers who want to get their work produced?
Yes. I mean, so much. So let's try and think of some key ones or a key one. I mean, I always try and do a shout out when I can to an amazing person called Ricky Beadle Blair, who was an amazing mentor to me, as well as many other writers and leaders in the industry. Without him, I wouldn't be where I am. And he runs all sorts of free workshops and amazing stuff. So everyone should Google him and connect with him if they can. But I mean, he always talks about spotting opportunity and being amazing at spotting opportunity and acting upon it. And when I think about some of the lucky things I've been lucky enough to do, I think that's the skill that I've really practiced on refining. You know, writers come and talk to you and they're like, oh God, I just want my first play on and it's so hard and there's just no way, no one's listening. And it is, all those things are true. When you start brainstorming with them ways that they might get their play on, they usually sometimes outline, like they'll say, okay, well, there is this one person I met at this event once whose cousin happens to be really interested in this one field, who then I then met at this thing, and maybe on the second moon of September, blah, blah, blah. So it's like some crazy route, right? Where they're basically like, it's never going to happen, but there's this really outlandish way that it might happen. And actually what they've done is describe the one way it probably is going to happen. They've spotted the sort of opportunity, even as crazy as it is, and then dismissed it because it feels crazy. However, those are the ways that shows get made. You really have to find that unique way that your piece is going to go on and use all the people that you know and utilize all the resources that you have. So I really enjoy encouraging writers to think outside the box in ways to get their work on, spot the opportunity and then act upon it. You know, so many people do spot the opportunity, but never really, really go for it. They talk themselves out of it. They say that's too outlandish. It's never going to happen. When those are the ways. We've talked for ages, so I won't talk about all the ways my plays have gone on, but they are crazy routes that I was like, it's never going to happen. And then it sort of happens. And looking back, you can see all of the solar system of opportunity that you somehow connected to make it happen. So yeah, I guess I just want to encourage writers that is the way it happens. So go for it when you spot that obscure way that it might happen.
Yeah,
and try and feel empowered. Find ways to feel empowered. This industry can really disempower you in so many ways, and you have to remember that the industry is nothing without artists. Theatres will close without new stories. So we hold the power. Artists hold the power, even if everything or the industry is set up in a way that makes you feel otherwise. You have to remember, I have something that they literally need for this ecosystem to survive. And that's probably why people make artists feel disempowered all the time. So as artists, it's our job to find ways to feel happy and empowered and remain in our power and remember that even when times get hard.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic advice, especially, considering that quite often we submit plays, to competitions or something, and we hear that, 10,000 people have submitted, and it can very much feel like you send your work off and you just wait and you don't maybe hear back, or, or there's just too many people have applied and you kind of don't get anywhere. So I think that's great to get people thinking about the different ways that they can,
yeah, and the reality, and remember the reality, one person on each of those competitions is going to win. Yeah. It's so rare. I mean, I'm not saying these things aren't great, they are, and I'm not saying don't submit, you should, and use them as deadlines. But outside of these slightly disempowering systems like competitions, where, like you say, you send it and there's nothing you can do, outside of those, look for more empowering ways forward. And that basically means find ways to do it yourself, I'd say. Find ways to make something happen with you and your collaborators and the resources that you have, because then you are in the driving seat of your career, rather than constantly handing away your power by just sending off your script and praying to whatever you believe in. Do you know what I mean? And I know this is complicated, and I know it's not as easy as that, but also it sort of is. You have the power to do so much without these people, and at some point they'll get on the bus. But people like to get on the bus when it's driving really fast down the road. They don't want to get on the bus when it's just waiting at the bus stop and you don't know if it's going to take you there. That's another Ricky thing, by the way. I can't claim that one. But so you have to make sure your bus is moving. You have to make sure you're doing things and making stuff happen. Then suddenly everyone wants to hop on board because you're going somewhere. So that's what I mean about switching the sort of power balance and just thinking, what can I do without anyone, actually? What can I do for myself?
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you. And what final sort of question, would you have any advice for anyone who's wanting to kind of work in a literary department or as a new work associate?
Yeah, I guess similar to what I've just said, in like find ways to do it, because at the moment I don't really see the entry level. There's a few of these jobs in the industry. There's not loads, so it's competitive. And there's not like a step, and now you're the literary manager or whatever. So as you can hear from my story, it was wiggly and I never really expected to be a literary, and here I am and I love it. But so I think you have to find ways to start doing it before you're doing it. You have to find ways to build your CV away from institutions, possibly, because there aren't many literary assistant positions. Obviously, you could start being a reader. You can then maybe try and get a literary assistant position. But again, there's so few of those opportunities. You just have to make it happen. So often I meet people that want to work in literature, and I say, okay, what writers do you have relationships with? What plays have you developed? Could you share a play that you've dramaturged and that you've got to a position? Often they haven't done that, or the plays they've worked on, they don't actually think are the best example of the types of plays they like, or where they can get it to, because maybe they say the writer wasn't experienced enough to get it to where, or I was paid for this one random thing to be a dramaturg on, but it's not really my taste. It's just what happens to work on. So to those people, I'd say, well, at some point you've got to build your portfolio. You've got to do the stuff that you're actually going to do. So, why can't you connect with some of your favorite writers, or find the emerging writers that are really in line with your taste, who need support, be that support for them, build your relationship. So when you go to a theatre, you have more to offer, and also help them develop their plays, so that when you go for interviews or the way you can talk, you can say, here are 3 plays that I developed with 3 exciting writers. And these are an example of not only how good I can make a play when I work with writers, but also the sort of taste and the things that I'm excited about. To which you're then saying to institutions, I'm doing the job you need me to do. I'm making the amazing plays with amazing writers. What an amazing resource I am. You're going to want to hire me and bring me to do it for your organization. Do you know what I mean? So you have to sort of start doing it before that role is going to happen. But again, that's really empowering, because that's something we could all start doing tomorrow if that's really something you want to do.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And there are opportunities to go and do that, because there are plenty of writers out there who would absolutely love
help.
Some support in that way. So,
and if you need money, and obviously these things take time, then you could apply to the Arts Council for a grant to do a project where you work with these writers in some way and try and get it funded by the Arts Council. I'm not saying that's easy as either, but you can. But it's a bit like, I think if you look outside the theatre industry, I think it's what I'm told it's like anyway, where people go in for promotion and meetings or whatever, or try and negotiate their salary. In other organizations, often they take on more responsibility over the course of the year. They do more. So then they go into that meeting and say, well, listen, I'm doing all these extra things. Now you're going to have to pay me more. And then they get their pay rise. It's a little bit similar. And, you want to be already doing the job. So you can say to someone, I'm doing the job. And then it's obvious that you should be employed, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. That's really good advice. Thanks so much. So many interesting things there. Just one bonus question. What's your favourite play?
Oh my God. This is impossible to pick. So instead I'm going to say a collection of plays, which is Katori Hall is one of my favourite writers, American writer. She now writes in TV as well. So many amazing plays. But her Plays One collection, which is 4 plays that are all set in Mississippi in different time periods, and are all completely different plays. I love all 4 of them. And when I first read that collection, I was so inspired by the idea that this one writer can have a unique voice, but also write plays that are completely different, and so about her heritage and who she is, but in a really exciting contemporary way, even though some of them are period plays. It's just like, if you're going to read a collection, read those 4 plays. You will be inspired. She's amazing.
That's great. Thank you. Thanks very much. That's great. Thank you.
No worries. Well, thanks for inviting me, and well done for all you do. I mean, I've always followed the blog, and it's amazing how you bring together all those resources. I always tell writers to check it out, and all this other amazing stuff you're doing now. It's brilliant.